Sometimes it takes a while to realize just how routine life has become, or maybe sometimes you just don't want to notice. That's who I was. Every morning I'd wake up at 6, make my coffee, and clean every corner of the house the same way. Darnell, my husband, didn't really like to get up early. Even though he was retired, he always found something to do. His relationship with me had almost ended. It was just daily routines and the same conversations. While sipping my coffee and looking out the window, the same thoughts always ran through my mind. Could today be any different? But everything was the same. It had been the same for so long. Life had started to feel ordinary to me. Darnell decided to go on a week-long trip to visit our daughters. Even though he was gone, being alone in the house somehow felt peaceful to me. Those old, exciting days were long gone. No matter how much time we spent together, over time, the bond between us had weakened. All that was left were habits, empty conversations, and quiet dinners. The hours spent in front of the TV in the evenings, and sometimes sleepless nights, just kept going in the same cycle, the same way. But once, we used to share every moment, and even in our glances, we would discover something new. Now, those exciting days were behind us. Darnell's absence felt like a kind of freedom, but loneliness, that was a whole different feeling. Yes, being alone in the house brought some temporary relief, but at the same time, when I woke up in the mornings, not having Darnell around felt like an emptiness. Still, when I woke up with the first light of day and went to the kitchen, I realized exactly what I had lost. Loneliness was creeping in more and more with each passing day, wrapping itself around me, reaching into every corner. Darnell's absence felt like a silent freedom, but that emptiness, built up and grown over the years inside me, was now more real than ever. The walls of the house we once shared now only left me with memories, and those memories were becoming like strangers from the past, drifting further away. When I was alone, every corner of the house echoed with old sounds, old conversations, those memories of times we spent together. They all felt like nothing more than distant memories now, so faded and buried deep inside me that no matter what, each day I felt more and more tired, more and more lost. Yes, Darnell was gone, but the emptiness I felt was much bigger. I never realized how I had been so lonely in this house we shared for so many years, even with him here. We had lived for so long in the same four walls, shared a life with the same man, and yet it felt like we were drifting further apart every day. And that emptiness was slowly being replaced with a sense of hopelessness. A voice inside me kept saying that I deserved more than what I had, but what could I do? Adding someone else to my life, breaking up my marriage, that didn't appeal to me at all. I had been living this life for nearly 40 years, but still something was missing. One day, in the early evening, while I was alone in the kitchen, I realized just how empty my soul felt. Everything was silent, the yellow tones of the kitchen light gently illuminating every corner. Since Darnell had left, I had been so patient that his absence didn't weigh on me. In fact, at first, it felt like I was waiting for something to get better. Darnell's departure had felt like freedom to me, but with that, a deep loneliness had also emerged. The order of things, the routine flow of life, gave me some relief, but deep down inside my heart, something was missing. There was an emptiness, and it had been growing from somewhere I hadn't noticed before. Maybe for years I hadn't dared to bring this feeling to the surface, a feeling I hadn't acted upon for so long. The emptiness inside me made me realize how much I had gotten used to it. Although Darnell's disappearance felt peaceful, I had no answer for what would fill the void left by the lost things. By the end of the day, everything seemed to be in its right place, but my heart felt a step behind. It was as if my soul had paused a step behind, observing life. I couldn't feel like I was truly living, yet I had learned to live with it. I had lived with this emptiness, with this emotionless life for so long that I had gotten used to living in a huge house where nothing could bring back that emptiness. There was silence in every room and loneliness echoed in every corridor. And then, one night, after Darnell had gone, something started to change. That night, there was a difference. In the middle of such a long routine, in such a familiar environment, something had changed unnoticed. I found myself in the kitchen. I was preparing dinner just like usual. My body moved at the pace I had gotten so used to. I had finished all the tasks and was hearing the ticking of the clock in the corner. The sound of the clock echoed through the room, as if every corner of the house was following its rhythm. The familiar sounds of creaking floorboards reminded me of the echoes of conversations that used to spread throughout the house. I knew every corner of this house, every sound, every movement. But that night, I noticed something. I was so used to it that I never imagined even the ordinary movements would feel strange. However, that night, the atmosphere I was so familiar with strangely shifted. The cold light of the kitchen still gave me my usual sense of calm, but this time there was something extra. The air felt different. It was as if there was something missing, but this time, instead of unsettling me, the feeling of emptiness intrigued me. Somewhere, deep inside, something was changing. Maybe I had been ignoring this feeling for years, but the small details I noticed that night made everything feel different. Everything, somehow, felt more alive. It was past midnight. I turned off the lights and went to my bedroom. I put on my sheer nightgown and lay down on the bed. Just as I was about to close my eyes, I suddenly heard the sound of the back door. I quickly turned my head. I wasn't expecting anyone. No matter how calm I tried to be, a fear gripped me in that moment. The sound from the door seemed to signal that someone had entered. My heart started pounding as I rushed out of the room. I opened the door. At that moment, my eyes landed on the young man. He wore a hat, and there was an intensity in his eyes I couldn't quite understand. A deep fear washed over me. "I didn't mean to scare you. I thought you were asleep," he said, his voice soft. His eyes stayed fixed on me. This man was a stranger, yet in some strange way, he felt familiar. I didn't know him, but the sharp look in his eyes affected me deeply. "What do you want?" I asked, gripping the rolling pin tightly in my hand. "You don't need that," he said. "I came to take your valuables." There was an inexplicable calmness in his voice, and it unsettled me greatly. Slowly, but decisively, I turned on the living room light, my eyes still locked on this stranger. A mixture of fear and curiosity was rising within me. This young man was a thief? But why was he acting so calm and collected? After a brief silence, he took a few steps toward me. I still didn't know what he was going to do, but his every movement was so quiet that it felt like a threat. But strangely, something inside me was drawn to him. I could deeply feel the dark meaning behind his eyes as he watched me. "Do you know me?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "No," he replied. "But I'd like to," he said, eyeing me from head to toe. At that moment, the sly smile in his eyes drew me closer. For a moment, I felt like I was losing control of my own body. Brad, the name I would later learn, suddenly took his place in the living room. I gestured to the chair for him to sit. In my mind, the impulse to call for help clashed with the idea of getting to know him. He slowly and confidently walked to the spot I pointed to and sat down. With hesitant and unsure steps, I sat beside him. We were so close that the space between our bodies seemed to vanish. My breath quickened, and alongside the fear inside me, something else was awakening. I could feel it, but I still didn't understand what it was. "Would you like something to eat?" I whispered, my tongue dry in my mouth. "It doesn't sound too bad," he replied. And in that moment, without understanding why, I felt myself moving even closer to him. Brad had settled into the kitchen. I watched him carefully with every movement he made. Was he really a thief, Or was there something else going on? A voice inside me told me to treat this like any ordinary robbery night, but for some reason I couldn't accept it. The intensity in his eyes, mixed with what I was feeling, took me to a completely different place. The atmosphere between us had changed. Everything now felt more tense, but at the same time, it also felt more intimate. I could feel that this story was starting right here. The possessions didn't matter anymore. There was something else between us. But what was it? As time went on, the tension in the house eased somewhat. A few days had passed since Brad had entered my home, but I still thought about that night and about him. At first, I was overwhelmed with a feeling I didn't dare share with anyone, but Brad, each time, affected me in a different way. The tense, fearful emotions from our first encounter had been pushed aside. Now, with every meeting, I was savoring those moments. It was as if time had stopped, and with every move he made, he left a mark. That night, when I was alone with him in the kitchen, I felt something, a sense that something was about to change. We were growing closer with each passing moment. He moved slowly, gracefully, yet with such boldness. With every step, every movement of his body, there was a magnetic pull. As we talked, his eyes seemed to whisper something to me, each word affecting me more. You know, sometimes eyes seem to look into the depths of a person, as if they know who you really are. And in those eyes, Brad was telling me something, but mostly I could feel his silence. It was so meaningful. Those looks, it was as if everything between us was a secret. As time passed, forgetting that night became impossible. Sometimes when I was alone at home, I would close my eyes and think about that night, and I could feel something awakening inside me. I was feeling alive again, as if someone were touching the depths of my soul. That night, we were so close. The distance between us seemed to have vanished somewhere. As we spoke, Brad's every move was telling me something. His fingers seemed to trace my body lines, every touch filling a part of the emptiness in my heart. For a moment, fear was the only thing left. Touching him felt so natural, as if my body was being drawn to him more with each movement. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, but at the same time I was certain of something. Everything suddenly felt right. Having Brad around made me feel a sense of presence, of being. The uncertainty in my eyes had disappeared. Between us, in every look, every word, there was more meaning. One day during dinner, Brad opened up a little more. He shared some things about his past, some deep, some that tugged at my heart. The mix of emotions I felt created a sense of lostness. He felt like a stranger, but at the same time, familiar, as if I had known him for longer. The darker moments in his past were a bit foreign to me, but at the same time, I wanted to understand him. "I want to share some things with you," he said. In that moment, the confusion of my feelings grew. I didn't respond immediately. I just stayed silent. But somewhere deep in my heart, I realized how deeply I was feeling. Slowly, I focused on every word he said, every move he made. The complexity of it all seemed to bring us closer. One evening, we were alone again. As the night fell, the silence inside the house grew even deeper. In that moment, there was no need for anything else to convey our emotions. We were trying to understand everything just by looking into each other's eyes. The uncertainty in my eyes vanished in his gaze. He took another step closer and placed his lips on mine. At first it was slow and cautious, but then our lips met passionately. Nothing else mattered, only that moment. We lost ourselves in each other, diving deeper. His fingers traced my body, leaving marks at every point. What I was feeling couldn't be described in words. I was feeling that moment where desire and emotions merged in the purest way. My fears had disappeared, replaced by a new feeling, courage. It was as if everything echoed in the deepest corners of my soul. Every touch made my heart race, and with every movement, we were drawing closer to each other. Brad's touch was awakening my body. The feelings I had lost for years were resurfacing with him. I felt alive again, my heart beating fast for the first time in years. I felt so close to him. My body was pushing toward him. Nothing was scary anymore. Slowly but surely, we were moving deeper into each other's worlds. Every step was a place we had never discovered before. Just thinking about that moment intoxicated me. We were so close that one more step would have been enough. As my fingers wandered across his body, my breath was pulling him even closer. And suddenly, time stopped. In Brad's eyes, I could feel the strength of the bond we had formed between us. This was the beginning of something, but it was also an ending. Our breaths were in perfect rhythm, almost like they were singing a song in the room. With every step closer we took, the bond between us grew stronger. In that moment, I felt that being together was more important than anything else. The person I feared was no longer there. Brad had discovered not just my body, but my soul as well. And with every touch, we were beginning to understand each other more deeply. This was not just physical closeness, but a spiritual discovery. I was rediscovering myself after so many years. It had been a long time since I had forgotten this. I could feel these feelings deep within me coming back to life, urging me to move forward. That night, every touch, every smile made me feel something I had never experienced before. I felt alive again. The bond Brad and I shared was a kind of discovery. The nights I spent with Brad felt like a dream. The more real it was, the more unreal it seemed. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Before, days and weeks passed by, and I became more and more faded with each one. But after meeting Brad, everything changed. Suddenly, the colors of my world shifted. He saw me and awakened the vitality that had been lost inside me. With him, every moment felt like stepping into another world. For the first time, I was experiencing the vitality I had lost so long ago. There was something that had disappeared from a woman's body, but had always remained in her soul, the search. And Brad, he gave me back that lost peace. So many years of loneliness had increased the emptiness inside me. But not for a moment did I dwell on it, because with every movement, with every touch, he somehow filled that emptiness. Everything was making me forget the Lona I was before. Every moment I spent with Brad reminded me that time was just an illusion. With him, my heart was beating again. And suddenly I realized the years I had lost were coming back with Brad's touch. Being with Brad reminded me of how precious life is. The old me was just a woman who had lived. But now, with Brad's presence, I feel so much more. He's not just awakening me physically, but spiritually as well. I'm not talking about a relationship that takes me away from myself, but a bond that gives me more. Brad was the missing piece of my life, and now that I've found him, I don't want to get lost in the shadows of the past anymore. I know that one day everything will come to light. I'll be caught. I can feel it. But I'm not sure how ready I am for it. Thinking about that day fills me with fear, but at the same time, I've accepted that it will happen. Such a strong bond will eventually come to the surface. But despite everything, these feelings I'm experiencing are worth it. From now on, every day I wake up as a very different Lona.